Yeah, we'll go ahead. We'll get started here. Like I said, today this is the Addigy Sudo Talks webinar. We're going to be talking about handling Apple system updates. This isn't just focused on macOS or just focused on iOS. We're going to talk a lot about what we're doing across the whole spectrum here. So this is a really good one to tune in for. And if you should need to leave for any reason or need to share this out with anybody in the team, you can always register for these after the fact as well and get access to those recordings too. So awesome. Thanks for jumping in, everybody.
Alrighty. All right, Travis. So welcome everybody to another part of the Sudo Talks webinar series. Thank you to all those who joined and to those who are watching this on the recording. Thanks for checking it out. So as Travis mentioned, today we're going to be talking about system updates and upgrades, a very popular topic in the Apple community. And we'll just go ahead and get started. So here's our agenda. Our agenda is going to be a very, very condensed or brief history of macOS, key terms and definitions that we'll be using throughout this webinar. And so we want to make sure that that's highlighted and that we all understand what we're talking about. Addigy's response to the different architectures and the different iOS and macOS and iPadOS and tvOS versions. We're also going to go over a what if, so kind of like what if X or what if Y, kind of like an FAQ. And then at the very end, we'll take a Q&A. So any questions, we'll try to answer it in this webinar, or we'll follow up with you after the webinar. I go by GC. I'm the support manager here at Addigy.
Yep. And I'm Travis Berry. I'm one of the solutions architects on team as well. So if you've come through, GC is really, he's worn a lot of different hats. He is acting as our support manager right now. He's doing great there. You probably talked to him once, twice, 3 times if you needed to reach out. If you've come through onboarding recently, you probably talked to me or another one of the solutions architects on the team. We handle a lot of those. So if you good to now you can finally see our faces. If you interacted with us before, this is what we look like. So glad to have everybody in. So with that out of the way, let's get into the meat and potatoes, what we're really here for today. So Mac OS, right? The big things and a big change that you may not even necessarily have been aware, especially if you're kind of coming into Apple management as someone who's new to it from like a Windows history. Apple made a pretty drastic change with the release of Mac OS Big Sur, and the big change, amongst other changes to the operating system itself, was just the naming convention itself. Up until that point, Apple had been using Mac OS X, right? Because it was Mac OS 10, and then they're all different flavors of 10. You have big one like Mojave 10.14, or Catalina right after that 10.15. And they kept that naming convention going for a really long time, all the way up until the release of macOS Big Sur, where they actually, for the first time, jumped to a new major macOS version. And they've kept that going. macOS 12 Monterey released last year, and then we've just had the release macOS Ventura, which is macOS 13. So kind of like I said, it seems pretty commonplace, but in terms of like how Apple does things, this is a pretty big shift that signaled a lot of the new directions they were taking things, and a lot of the ways managing updates is actually changing for us as well.
Yeah, to Travis's point, since 2001, the inception of Mac OS X, they had never done a change to the major version. It was always 10 and then preceding numbers. And just a quick thing about this presentation, throughout it, you're going to be seeing on the bottom right QR codes. So if you have your phone handy or anything like that, we're not going to go too deep into some of these topics, but we do want to give you extra resources. So if you do see them pop up on the bottom right, go ahead and scan that with your phone. Alrighty. So some key terms and definitions that we want to make sure that we set. Contrary to popular belief, not everything is an update, not everything is an upgrade, and some of those verbiages kind of get lost in the weeds. So an upgrade is any major version change, which we, like Travis talked about, that's becoming more commonplace now. It used to not be a thing, but now that they moved away from 10.x or whatever the case is going to be, It's now going up to 11 dot whatever, 12 dot whatever, and then today where we are at with Ventura, it's 13. So that's an upgrade when you're changing from a major version. On the update side, it's a minor version change. So anything on that second decimal point, that's going to be an update. So you're keeping the same major macOS version, but you're moving up an update. And then a patch is just usually like a security patch. Those happen at the tail end. It's that third decimal point. So if we see in this example 12.6.1 moving over to 12.6.2, that's a patch. What we're really not going to get too into, but you can scan those QR codes. Build version tells you even more about how many releases happened up to that major release or that update or that patch. Silicon, which is the new proprietary processors that are being used in any of the new shipped Apple devices. Like for example, on the Macs, we're seeing M1s, M1 Pros, M1 Maxes, M2, and so forth. And then on the right-hand side, we can talk a little bit about volume ownership. Volume ownership is similar to secure token. It's applicable really only on these silicone devices, and it's required to conduct actions like EACS, which is erase all content and settings, software updates and upgrades, etc. So that volume ownership works in tandem with secure token and also something called bootstrap token. If you want to see more about that, go ahead and check out those QR codes. I'll give you all a second if you want to pull out your phone and grab that.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, the other thing is a big change that you may have noticed, especially if you've been dealing with a lot of silicone machines, is any M1, M2, whatever flavor of silicone device that you have, if you're running macOS Big Sur or anything newer, and you are not enrolling machines through automated device enrollment, you'll notice when you go through the standard enrollment process, you use that enrollment link on the device and approve the profile. That actually doesn't provide all of those permissions that MDM needs, and the big ones that you'll see are the ability to manage kernel extension or system extension whitelisting, and also the ability to push and force reboots as part of the update upgrade process. This requires booting the device into recovery mode to manually apply that permission. So again, it's another one of those things where, if we can, and kind of what we want to be doing, especially to our clients, and also taking back to our internal IT teams, if we haven't started that process, if we're unfamiliar with Business Manager, now's really the time to do it, because it's going to make the update process a lot simpler, right? So something else to keep in mind there. Like I said, we won't cover too much of that today. That's not really the focus of this, but there is some good literature there. And we'll see if we can also dredge up. We did a webinar, actually, I think about this time last year, where we talked about changes to Bootstrap Token too. So we'll make sure we can get that linked as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Travis.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so with all of the changes that Apple made, and for anybody, again, who's kind of coming in new, or for people who've been kind of working along with us with this, big change that Apple has moved is they are pulling more and more controls, as I just mentioned with the MDM Bootstrap token. There's less that we can do through sort of like, the old method, right? Where we could use our, command line utility that was just built in on the Macs, we could call through any sort of script. And that's really what a lot of our agent processes were doing. And that was enough on your older OSs, and kind of like this slide, marks out, really with most of the older OSs, this worked just fine. We had a lot of controls. We could set, update schedules. We could push updates. We could force restarts, force prompt messages as part of all of that. But more of that is moving off of the command line utilities, being deprecated in newer flavors of the OS. And most of these controls are moving to MDM, which is actually kind of the genesis for why we're doing this webinar, and part of what we're going to show here later in the day. In essence, really kind of pre-Big Sur, right? So if you got any Mojave devices or Monterey devices that you're managing out there, in the Addigy policies page, the existing, what you've kind of been using in the past, that's really the best one for your managing updates, pushing those out, doing things here. And again, we're talking updates here. With upgrades, really kind of your best bet is still going to be in that public software catalog, pushing the major OS version installer from that list as well. Of course, we also have the OS blockers available as public software items. If you just search block install, you should see a whole list for pretty much every flavor of macOS that's out there. So if you don't want people to upgrade, especially with Ventura right out here, it might be a good idea to get that blocker in place so you can test things out, make sure nothing breaks when the new OS comes down. And again, really Big Sur Mac OS 11, again, big shift from naming convention and also how we actually get things done on the device. This is where Apple starts playing with MDM updates and starts developing these, and we start seeing less and less control for the command line utility. And really, Mac OS 12, Mac OS Monterey, this is where we see, okay, this is Apple's new plan for system updates through MDM. And they're adding additional controls for this. There's more and more that we're going to be able to do with the improvements and controls that Apple's making available as part of new OS builds, which we'll see in with Ventura already. So in short, pre-Big Sur, the standard command line action, which you can access today in the policies page, policies, system updates, you'll be able to control those. Big Sur is a little tougher. Again, this is where we lose some of that command line functionality, but not all of the MDM tools are built out for us yet. So downloading you can actually use that public software downloader to push the updates to those incremental versions. You just download the newer version of the installer for that version. That can be an easier way to push that out. And then the really moving forward, MDM updates are, in a lot of ways with Apple management and MDM, it is the way, the truth, and the light now. So getting on board, working with the Apple MDM updates is where we want to be headed. And again, that's what we're going to be talking about mainly today.
Perfect, Travis. A good rule of thumb for those software updates through the command line tool, if it's the major version starts at the 10, you're clear to use that mechanism. Once you start seeing 11, you're going to want to go elsewhere. This is just for best practice. We've seen the most success with our customers following this exact formula. So some of the requirements for the beta specifically, it's going to be an MDM provider. So in this case, us, Addigy. So you would enroll in MDM. You can do that as Travis mentioned, and this is going to allude to the next bullet point, through Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, and that's with a feature called Automated Device Enrollment. It used to be called DEP. And I'll kick it to Travis for the supervision part.
Yeah, so device supervision is another really important piece of Apple management without, judging through all the documentation. It's basically a way that we get access to as much control as we can in an Apple ecosystem with MDM. If you've ever gone through in your Addigy environment, or you've looked in any MDM, there are MDM profile and payload options that we can only exercise that option if the device is in a supervised state. And device supervision, in the past, the only way you could have a device supervised is through automated device enrollment. Now, there are other avenues with iOS. You can manually supervise a device without Business Manager. But if you're going to do that, really, you can use that, take it an extra step, and add that device to a Business Manager account. So you can then have automated device enrollment. And again, that's going to be the best case for enrolling into any MDM. With macOS supervision, another giant change Apple made for us in macOS Big Sur was if you have any macOS device, doesn't matter if it's Intel, doesn't matter if it's M1, if it enrolls into an MDM vendor and it has that MDM profile, the enrollment profile approved, which you should be doing whenever you enroll the machine, once that profile is granted approval, it is automatically counted as a supervised Mac, which is huge. That's big for us because previously, again, the only way to have that on macOS was if it came through automated device enrollment, which means we were kind of locked out of these additional controls. So good news is if you can get the Mac to macOS 11, it can be a supervised machine even without automated device enrollment. Now, the other controls we're going to talk about here with system updates is the requirements for that. So the commands, all of the options that we're using, the hooks we have within MDM to exercise these controls, they're only going to be available to those supervised machines. And then we have some OS requirements as well, because without that OS, they don't know that these commands exist. So macOS is going to be macOS Monterey, macOS 12 and up, again, building towards Monterey, Ventura, and things that are coming from the future there. The iOS 9 and up, iPadOS 13 and up, and then tvOS 12.
Perfect. And just to close off that supervision conversation, I think around this time as well last year, we did a webinar on how to add devices. So if you find yourself you finally have your ABM account, you finally have your ASM account, your business manager, school manager accounts, and you're like, okay, I have all these devices. how do I get them into my new account? We made a webinar about last year about how to retroactively add devices you've purchased into your business manager or your school manager account. Because Apple now lets you do that as well, which is super helpful. It lets you kind of manage those devices in a more centralized location, and also gives you the ability to use more features like apps and books and stuff like that. We'll keep it going.
Yes, and actually, before we continue, really good question that was brought up is that supervision requirement is for the scoping the updates to Mac, right? Being able to use our new system updates beta, we can see here on the screen. In order to leverage this at all, the device needs to be supervised. Now, like we talked about before, the actual reboot, big changes, it comes with that bootstrap token. So if you have a Mac and let's say it doesn't come through automated device enrollment, it doesn't get that bootstrap token automatically, and it's not rebooted into recovery mode and manually provided that permission for MDM to manage the updates and force the restarts, system updates will still be able to push out the update, but it will not be able to force a restart on the user. It'll just manifest as a prompt. So in essence, the question is you have to ideally have both, either automated device enrollment or the manual approval in order for, and device supervision in order for the new system updates beta to work. And that's correct, right? So good, very good question, a good catch there. Exactly. And like we can see here with new system updates, this is another good question that was asked is when do we anticipate exiting or completing the system updates beta? I think it's safe to say we handle our betas a little bit differently than you might be used to in other tools. This, with system updates making it to beta, we have tested it internally, so it is as stable as we can get it. Everything is past all of our initial QA testing, a lot of testing. It's gone back into the fire a couple of times. And we make it in beta, and the big reason we do this is we want the real world experience, right? It's all well and good. It works on my machine. We've all heard that a million times. Does it work on your machines, right? Ultimately, this is a tool to try and make work better. And if it doesn't do that, we're not doing our job. And that means you don't pay us. And that means we don't eat. And we very much like to eat. So we release these things in beta. We do our betas this way because it gives us the opportunity to say, okay, here's where things are. This is what we've got. We have a stable feature here. It's working as we've intended it to. It's past all of our initial scoping. What else do we need? What is the actual use cases that people are butting into that maybe we haven't considered? I can tell you right off the bat, one of the things that we're looking at is proving on system updates already is prompt options, right? We'll get into a little bit more right now about how this functions now, but one of our big goals that's been talked about from the product to development side internally is more robust prompt controls. Are there ways that we can make that user experience a little better and just improve upon it? So, and in terms of like a hard answer, I have no hard date on when we would be closing out the system updates beta. That's actually, decisions by people, a lot higher up the totem pole, a lot smarter than I am. But I can tell you, we'll pull the beta tag whenever we feel like it's gotten to a level where obviously it continues to work and does what we need it to, but it's also got that kind of baseline feature experience everyone expects to have when they think about system update management. So in essence, yeah, please give us feedback in the new system updates UI. If you haven't seen this before, you can turn this on. You go account in settings in your Addigy portal. If you have the owner permissions, you'll be able to do this. And at the very bottom of all of where you fill out your support email address and things are all the beta features. We'll show that in the portal here towards the end so everybody can actually see that. But once you do, this then becomes available in the policies page. So every policy will have the ability to configure the system updates, and you'll see new system updates beta, and that is MDM system updates. The other macOS updates, Microsoft Office updates, those are going to still be command line utility. That's what we talked about before. That's what we've been using for a very long time. This is MDM-based updates.
Perfect. And as Travis was saying, so we wanted to make sure that before this became a public beta, that the core functionality was there, that the updates can happen. And if you look closely, upgrades also. So if you look at my two differences here in macOS and iOS, it's that I've set a maximum version on my macOS updates. So for example, they should not go anywhere beyond 12.6, and that's all fine. But for the more hands-off approach, for the more hey, I know that every year we come to expect a brand new version of macOS, and I want my customers or I want my end users to always be on the latest and greatest and have it immediately and be the first ones to get that new macOS. You can also do the keep devices updated to the latest OS. And in parentheses here, we've got including major versions. So like we talked about, and if you ever forget the major, the minor, and all that stuff, we have little examples on the right-hand side in this box. But basically what that's going to ensure is that Ventura came out, and so your Ventura will update. But whatever next year's release is, if you have that button clicked, it's going to apply that one as well. And so that's for the way more hands-off approach. If you use this tool in conjunction with flex policies, it can be super powerful for being the most hands-off like we've ever had system updates and upgrades handled, like period. And okay, so we'll move forward. So this is kind of the UI. As Travis said, if you go to account settings and you scroll down, you'll be able to see it's a public beta, so you can turn that on if you're an owner. But we also got a little bit of some recordings because I know coming from the support side, a lot of people and a lot of admins want to know, what does this look like for my end user? Because a lot of the time that's who they are kind of reporting to. It's like the end user is going to see something and I need to be able to tell them what to expect. And so we'll kind of demo from the admin side first, and then I'll show you an end user side on the macOS device and an end user side on the iOS device, as those are the two most popular type of updates that we see happening. So here, I'll go ahead and get us started. And so what we see here, and I'm gonna go ahead and go full screen just to make this a little bit bigger. This is pretty impressive. A lot of our customers have asked us for a very long time for progress bars on a lot of things, and this is the closest we've ever been able to get with a accurate progress bar. So if you're looking at this video, it's what we're seeing right here in front of you. This is in GoLive for any one particular device that's assigned an update or an upgrade from a policy level. And as we can see, we have that downloading option. And as we hit that refresh button, we can see this actually making some forward progress. And I'll show you what the exact thing looks like on the iPhone. So we just saw that jump. It went from the 60s to the 70 something percent, which is great. Like I said, this is the closest we've ever gotten to a progress bar, which is very nice. Let me see here. I can get us out of here. Perfect. And so as I mentioned, that's super helpful. It's actually even more helpful than what you were to look at if you were physically on that iOS device. So here's that same exact iOS device, and I'll make it bigger. It just says preparing update. So although we have that progress bar, Addigy actually shows you the percentage, which is amazing. Like I said, this is at least on the support level. I think it's cool because we get asked this all the time. We finally have a way of giving a pretty good judgment call on how far along is this download happening. This is super sped up footage by like 1,000%. This is actually upgrading, as you guys saw in that previous screenshot. I had iOS 15 device. It jumped up to a new major version. It's a 16.1. And like I said, this is super sped up. This upgrade actually took close to an hour. But we're seeing that progress. You as the admin on the Addigy side, you can actually see the download, so the percentage, which is super great. And yeah, it's just super clear, super powerful. As we can see here, this was downloaded there. And then let me exit one more time. So I showed you the iOS side, and then we'll look at kind of what it looks like here on the macOS side, which is usually the most popular. And so one big thing here is that we are using the default restart settings. What does that mean? At this time, the default restart settings, and Travis alluded to it, we want to be able to come up with more ways to handle this and give a little bit more flexibility because every company has their own methods. But pretty much right now, if you were to get into the system updates, public beta, this is what they're going to see on the macOS side. Your end user is going to get prompted. It's going to be a 60-second prompt. Within those 60 seconds, the computer is going to restart. If they don't want to restart, and we'll go over this in the what ifs, although it's not explicitly written, you can communicate as you want, and depending on which end user you want to tell this to, you can actually click that restarting your computer prompt and pause the reboot as far as indefinitely as we can make it happen. So when we were testing this, I was able to click that, and I waited almost a full week. I turned I unlocked that laptop, it still hadn't rebooted. When I did do the reboot, it went ahead and it finished the update. So it did this installation. This one also is sped up by like 1,000%. So you're going to see here, this is what to expect. As soon as that prompt ends, if the end user did not click on the prompt to pause it, it's going to go ahead and do a restart. This restart, we're going to see start here. Like I said, it's sped up. We're also going to see that it's going to restart multiple times. So just to get a good perspective here, your device may reboot multiple times. You may see that progress bar reach the end and then it reboots again. So I just wanted to show kind of a very accurate, hey, this is what we can expect to see, so that you can communicate that properly with your end users. Because sometimes it can get confusing. You know, you can just say, oh yeah, click here, it's going to update, you'll be just fine. But just wanted to give you all a little bit more verbose of what to really expect. You know, so multiple restarts. You can pause it with the notification, and then that's it. You just make it back to your login screen.
Perfect. And then the other thing to note too is we're primarily talking about the new feature that we've added in is MDM system updates beta in policies. So being able to manage and enforce updates across an entire policy. You can actually deploy MDM updates via GoLive, even still. So while you're testing, you may, even if there's a little bit of trepidation where maybe you don't want to push this to have this enabled for an entire policy, right? You can actually still push the update manually. It's not going to be the same as Addigy kind of just enforcing and pushing new updates as they become available, right? Through some of the settings you have there. But you can still push one-off updates to machines through the GoLive page as well. So this is not the only place in the platform where MDM updates are utilized. They are also still utilized on GoLive as well. And keep in mind, again, with those are hard requirements on, especially for your macOS devices. They do have to be running macOS Monterey, macOS 12 and up, right? So that's essentially your where am I eligible? What can I test this on? macOS 12. Another question that came through the chat here was, well, what happens if I have like a mixed kind of environment in the same policy? I have devices on different OSs. If you set up you're using the system updates beta, that's only going to affect devices that are macOS 12 and up. So essentially the older command line options won't affect 12 and up, and MDM system updates beta won't affect 11 and under, because the devices just won't be able to process those commands.
Yep.
So.
Perfect. And that leads us to our what ifs. So we just kind of try to jump the gun, kind of ask ourselves, okay, what are our customers going to ask us, or what are your end users going to ask you? And so we kind of came up with a little bit of some what if scenarios. So what if no users are logged in? So in that case, with the default restart settings that we have in today's current beta, it will automatically restart the device. So if it's an unattended device that nobody logs into, it's going to basically take that as, okay, we have permission, and then move forward and restart the device. Keep in mind, if you have file vault and it's an unattended device and it restarts, you're going to have to unlock the disk before it comes back online and you see it online in Addigy again. We get that scenario quite often. So what if the logged in user does not want to reboot? Like I mentioned, they can click that notification. It's going to pause the reboot. After it's paused, you can induce the reboot by just going ahead and restarting your device. Just what you should probably set as some expectations is that if they pause the installation and they pause that reboot, the next time they turn their computer on, it's not going to be a minute. It's going to be anywhere between 20 minutes to maybe 60 plus minutes, depends on the update or if we're going to an upgrade. So just keep that in mind. What if my iPad or my iPhone has a passcode? Super great question. You will be prompted to enter your passcode before the upgrade or update can install. So if your iOS device has a passcode, it's going to request the passcode before it does the reboot. It won't just shut the device off on you. System updates is stuck on downloaded. So that goes back to that GoLive view that we saw. We see the downloading percentage. Once it reaches downloaded, if it doesn't move forward to installing, it's probably most likely that either the user paused it by clicking the notification, or if it's an iOS or iPadOS device, they most likely did not enter their passcode, or they put the passcode incorrect, and then that's not going to allow the install to complete. And then this last what if on this slide is I want the update upgrade to happen immediately. So something we didn't talk about right now, the way that the beta is set up, updates and upgrades are going to run once daily, but you also have, and I'll go back to it really quick, you can use a button called Start System Update, and that's going to expedite it. So let me see if I can get us back there really quickly. And we see that button. If you guys can see my mouse, if you can't, it's on the top right of this screenshot, Start System Updates. That's going to bypass the once daily, and then that way you can just immediately send those MDM commands out. And then Travis, if you want, we have a second what if.
Yeah. So the other one is what happens if somebody's working on something, right? What recourse does the user have? Well, for one, they're going to see that prompt pop up on the Mac. They're going to be able to see that and know, okay, I can do this. Like GC mentioned, they can go up, they can pause that update there. So just something to keep in mind there, but otherwise they're going to be asked to close out of the application before the update runs, kind of standard there. So there is a heads up, again, provided that they're able to actually look at that and make sure that, yes, I'm ready for the update, I can close out these applications. So something else that can come up on iOS we've seen is you'll get a message that says it's just not able to install the update. You can immediately choose the retry option, and you can also set the remind me later, essentially, and the device will prompt again to allow that reboot to go through. So another thing, this is going to be something that you're going to run into. Any iOS device that has a passcode, which ideally is probably most every iOS device that you're managing, if it has a passcode, it has to prompt and ask for the passcode in order to apply that update. That's just the way that the update behaves on the machine. That's the way the device processes it. If there is a passcode, it has to get that passcode to allow that update to go through. So something to be aware of as you're testing out, you're doing your iOS updates and upgrades there. So another thing too, like we mentioned, okay, this is awesome, great. We've got, Ventura's just come out. Now we have something where we can do some system updates across Monterey and everything here. But I'm not ready for Ventura. I'm not ready for the new OS. What do I do? Like I mentioned, in our public software catalog, we do have blockers available. So you can go into the public software and a policy. You can apply the macOS, the block install macOS Ventura on the machine, and that installs like a watchdog process. If you used any of our blockers before, it's the same process. What it does is it looks for that installer.app file for that update trying to run, that upgrade, excuse me, I should say. And if it sees the upgrade trying to run, it'll kill that and prevent it from going through on the machine. So it's, again, a really handy way to, just make sure you're able to get things tested on your end and make sure people aren't upgrading and then breaking all of the apps because they're not ready for the new OS quite yet. So we have that option as well. And then when you are ready, we now have a tool that's going to make it a lot easier to push that out to a bunch of machines. So some other questions that came up, and these are really good use cases as well, and we'll kind of move into Q&A here with some of the time we have left. What happens if a device isn't online whenever I send this command? So by virtue of it being an MDM command, that command gets queued. like the remote lock and wipe command, setting a wallpaper on an iOS device. Those commands are queued until the device checks back in. So normally, I think I'm not sure what the standard timeout for macOS commands. I think it's usually at least 24 hours. So if the device is offline, comes back on within 24 hours, it should still see that, unless there's some issue where it's just not communicating with MDM at all. Another question that comes up is, what happens if I have a device that's sitting at the file vault screen? And the answer to that is it's not going to see that. It'll wind up essentially as an offline device. Because with File Vault, the thing to keep in mind, and again, especially for anybody who's coming into Mac management as someone new, with File Vault, with disk encryption, when that's enabled, you're actually seeing at that screen as its own pre-boot volume. And you have to satisfy that by providing, usually it's the password of a user who has secure token access, which is what you need to unlock File Vault. Once you do that, normally, if you're not using some, it'll kind of just automatically log you in to that user account. If it exists on that device already, it would log you in as that user. You don't see, kind of the standard macOS login window. And that's actually, once File Vault is satisfied, you provide those credentials. That's where the OS proper boots, which is also where all of the communication to MDM, the Addigy agent communication all lives, is within the OS itself. So if the OS isn't booted, it's not going to communicate for that. So you wind up in that kind of offline state where that command is going to be queued, and that device should receive that instruction the next time it checks in. The other thing too is anytime a device reboots, just the way MDM functions is the devices trigger an MDM audit. So they go and talk to the MDM cloud server and say, okay, do I have any pending instructions? What needs to happen?
Right.
So.
And to Travis's point, it's not just MDM and like the Addigy agent. You don't have access to the internet when you're in the File Vault login window. So nothing. It wouldn't communicate with anything. And that's just part of the security feature. One last what if that we totally forgot. It's okay. You've turned the beta on. You're using it. How do I give feedback? And where does that feedback go to? So you can leave feedback directly to our internal teams via that feedback button in system updates. This is what it's going to look like. We want honest opinions. So if it's 1 star, it's 1 star. If it's 5 stars, great. But this will go straight to our product team so that they can get some feedback on what MDM software updates does for you, or what it doesn't do for you, or where it can be better, or where you think that it's shining. And so we want to make sure that you know where to get that and where to leave that feedback, and that it will be read by our internal teams.
Yeah, and like I said, kind of at the top here, this is why we release our beta features the way we do, is why we do so much testing, and then we may leave the beta tag on for a good while. You guys may remember with flex policies, we left that beta on for a very long time because we were still gathering use cases and making sure things were working the way we wanted them to and that they made sense and we could iterate and improve on those. And this is largely the same. So I'm going to drop a poll question here. I'm going to drop just a quick question into the chat. You can respond to that one there. Mainly just around, especially if you're coming in new, maybe you're coming in new to Apple management. You've seen a little bit about kind of what we got going on here and are interested. If you'd like the sales team to reach out to you, you can just hit yes, and somebody from the team will get in touch with you on that one there. So feel free to fill that out. And while we do that, GC, if you don't mind, if you'll just pull up in Addigy, we can just kind of show, I want to make sure we show everybody where the blockers are. We had 1 or 2 questions on that as well. And then we'll answer just a few more questions here, and then I think we'll wrap it up.
You got it, Travis. Let me pull up that Addigy account now.
Perfect. Awesome. And then one of the other questions that was mentioned was, with the blockers, do they only work on Ventura and up, or does it work on earlier versions as well? The answer to that question is pick the blocker for the OS you're trying to block, you're trying to prevent the installation of. We have, going all the way back, I think we still have Mojave blocker is still available in there, but for each major OS version, we build and release a new version of the blocker to target that specifically, and it only blocks that upgrade process. The other thing about the blocker is if you've got, let's say you're blocking Ventura, but you've already upgraded, so you've got a system that's running macOS 12, it's already there, you add it to a policy and it installs the Monterey blocker, the blocker itself won't prevent that device from doing updates. It only blocks the upgrade to that target OS, right?
Yep.
So another question is, well, if I have my settings in, Addigy with the new system updates beta set, so that I'm only blocking, rather than blocking, what I'm doing there is I'm just saying don't automatically push the newer versions, right? If I keep it so that I'm scoped within the same major version OS, I set that maximum version, I don't allow for the upgrades to be applied as part of those settings, then what Addigy is doing is it's not pushing and enforcing the upgrades there, right? You're basically telling Addigy, hands off, you don't need to manage this aspect, right? That's not the same as the actually blocking, because the blocker is really nice because it will prevent any method for upgrading, whether that's the user going in system preferences and clicking and trying to start the upgrade themselves, or even if you're trying to push the upgrade from Addigy as well. So it just completely blocks that process there. So,
Yeah.
and then this is in the UI here too.
Okay, so you guys can see everything now?
Yep, we've got you there.
Perfect. So as Travis was talking about, if you were to just go here to catalog public library, you'll see our macOS Ventura blockers. But to Travis's point, if you want to, and you're still not there yet, you're not ready for Monterey, we also have those Monterey blockers as well. You could also just write block install, and you can see all of our different block installers. So we have them all the way back to Catalina. Yeah. And same thing goes vice versa. So if you were looking for, let's say, Monterey, and you were looking to install Monterey on a device, let's say it's a Big Sur device like we talked about in our best practices slide deck, you're going to want to use this instead. So our public installers, if you take a look at it, we can see here our installation script. It's going to push down that Monterey installer, and all of our public softwares come with a condition script, so they'll always check and make sure that they're being run on the appropriate devices. And then we've got flavor text here in the description. So we have different experiences for different architectures, because with macOS, it's like that. There's a lot of different scenarios. So we talk a little bit about if you have an Apple Silicon device specifically, what to expect. We try to highlight those things whenever we can.
Yeah, and the other thing, GC, if you don't mind, if you'll just show in the account settings where they can go and enable the system updates beta.
Totally. So bottom left, you go to your settings, and then we'll scroll down, and you'll see that in the enable beta features. In my personal opinion and professional opinion, if you're going to go and turn on the system updates via MDM, I would also highly encourage you to turn on our Addigy Flex Policies beta, just because those two can work really well in tandem. And I say this even more so for our longer standing customers who are very accustomed to the hierarchy, the policy hierarchy, and having a parent-child inheritance between policies and stuff like that. Really try to immerse yourself in this new Flex Policies, because Flex Policies can kind of work outside of the hierarchy. And there's very often scenarios where, hey, I have my CEO in this child policy, but he doesn't want to be part of a certain restriction or anything like that. That's where Flex Policies comes in. And Flex Policies is also super strong with something else called auto assignment. And you can basically, I won't go way too into it, but you can assign devices based on their current macOS version to a policy. And that's all I'll say, but put that with our new system updates, and you can have a very powerful, very hands-off tool that basically takes care of a lot of different things for you without you having to do much, which is amazing, in my opinion.
Yeah. And in closing here, a couple of questions that we'll answer before we kind of shut things down. Especially when it comes to, and we see this all the time, every time there's a new major OS version, right? Or an update where, things change really drastically, like kind of losing Python 2 support in kind of a point release, right? Not even a huge major version upgrade. Is, well, how can I block this? How can I hide it from the users? Really kind of the only real, Apple Gold Star method for hiding updates is to use the restrictions MDM payload. Within that, you can set like a deferral date so that updates just don't show to users. And I think the maximum time on that is 90 days. It got a lot harder to hide like the update notifications when Apple switched how they manage those from coming through kind of like the App Store and now being piped directly into system updates. So this is really the best method for kind of hiding those updates. And then for blocking those major OS versions, that's going to be the the blocker in public software. Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Yep. So this is the payload that Travis was talking about. This MDM profile, it's a restrictions type MDM profile. You can go over here to the software updates tab, and then in there you have to click the first one to be able to enable the second one. It's going to delay that user visibility. Now keep in mind, it's 90 days from the day of the release. So it's not that you turned on this restrictions payload and now you've got 90 days. It's you've got 90 days from whenever the last release was.
Another question on the new system updates is, when do we expect that we'll have the advanced options, so more robust kind of controls and things? Unfortunately, they probably smartly, they didn't give us any timelines that we can share. I can tell you this is a huge priority that's being actively worked on by a lot of folks internally, actively testing. I think GC has even been kind of QA testing some of the stuff too earlier this week even. So expect to hear more on that fairly soon. We're also going to do, I think in about 2 weeks, towards the end of this month, we're going to have a true like a product update from the product team directly, where they're going to talk kind of about where we're planning on taking things platform wide, not just system updates, but other things that we're going to include there as well. So things to be aware of. But yeah, in essence, that's going to do it for this presentation. Again, highly encourage, you can enable the beta. Please do, if you're using the beta, do give us feedback. Genuinely, it's invaluable, especially for someone like Giancarlo and myself who spend most of the day talking with customers. And we've been hearing pain points about how difficult it's been to manage these updates. And we want to make that process better. So give us the feedback. It's no skin off our nose. At the end of the day, this is a tool, and the tool needs to do what you need it to do. Otherwise, it doesn't work for you. So let us know what it needs to do, and then we can work on building that out. Yeah, as always, don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have other questions and things. We're always here to help. We operate on a pretty open channel with GC and myself and the rest of the support team and the customer success team. So if you can have someone's email at Addigy, even if it's sales at Addigy or support at Addigy, if you reach out with questions, we will get you in touch with whoever we need to get them answered. So yeah, with that, thank you everybody very much for jumping in.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
So, bye now.